The words hung in the air like a prayer. Ellen DeGeneres, who had spent decades making America laugh, found herself speechless. The microphone trembled in her hand as she stared across the studio at two women who had just shattered every wall she'd built around her professional composure. In 28 years of television, nothing had prepared her for this moment. The cameras kept rolling, but this was no longer entertainment. This was two hearts colliding after 45 years of separation. But to understand what happened that Tuesday afternoon in Burbank, we need to go back to the beginning. To understand why a simple Teacher Appreciation Week segment became the most watched Ellen DeGeneres show episode in history. Sarah Mitchell, 45, had driven 18 hours from small-town Kansas to be on Ellen's show. As an elementary school teacher who'd spent 20 years in Title-like schools, working with kids who needed extra care, Sarah had been nominated by her students' parents for Ellen's annual teacher celebration. The letter that got her selected was simple. Mrs. Mitchell loves us like we're her own kids, especially those of us who don't have families. What the producers didn't know, what Sarah had never told anyone, was that she understood those children because she was one of them. Born in Los Angeles in 1978, Sarah had been placed for adoption when she was 3 days old. Her adoptive parents in Kansas had given her a beautiful life, full of love and opportunity, but there had always been a hollow space, a question mark where her beginning should have been. The Ellen Show studio that Tuesday was electric with its usual energy. Ellen moved through her opening monologue with characteristic warmth, the audience responding to every gesture, every perfectly timed pause. Sarah sat in the green room, nervously adjusting the simple blue dress she'd bought specifically for this moment. In her purse she carried the one piece of her past she'd always kept, a hospital bracelet, tiny, yellowed with age, with her birth name and date written in careful nurse's handwriting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ellen announced from the stage, "we're celebrating teachers today, and our first guest is someone who proves that family isn't just about blood. Please welcome Sarah Mitchell from Topeka, Kansas." Sarah walked onto the stage, overwhelmed by the lights and applause. Ellen greeted her with that famous hug, and immediately Sarah felt at ease. Ellen had a gift for making people feel seen, truly seen, in a way that transcended cameras and crowds. "So Sarah," Ellen said as they settled into their chairs, "tell me about your classroom. What makes you so special that parents write letters about you?" Sarah's voice was steady as she spoke about her students, about how she created family traditions in her classroom for kids who might not have them at home. "I guess I understand what it feels like to search for where you belong," she said quietly. "I was adopted as a baby, and my parents in Kansas gave me everything. But these kids, some of them are foster children, some live with grandparents, some have parents who work 3 jobs. I just want them to know that someone sees them." In the audience, a woman in her 60s sat in the 3rd row, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Maria Elena Vasquez had bought her ticket the moment she heard Sarah's name announced on the show's website. For 45 years she had wondered about the baby girl she'd held for only 3 hours before signing papers that would give her daughter the life she couldn't provide. Maria had been 17, undocumented, working in a Los Angeles restaurant for cash when Sarah was born. She had no family, no support, no way to care for a child. The decision to place Sarah for adoption was made out of love, not lack of it, but that hadn't made it hurt any less. "Can you tell us more about your adoption story?" Ellen asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Sarah took a breath. This wasn't something she talked about often. "I don't know much about my birth parents. I was born here in LA, actually, not far from this studio. My adoptive parents always told me that whoever my birth mother was, she must have loved me very much to want me to have a better life than she could give me." In the audience, Maria felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Those were nearly the exact words she had written in the letter she'd left with the adoption agency, a letter Sarah had never received. "Do you ever think about finding your birth family?" Ellen asked. Sarah nodded. "I used to when I was younger, but my adoptive parents were so wonderful, I didn't want them to think I was missing something. Now, I guess I just hope that wherever she is, my birth mother knows that her decision gave me an amazing life. I became a teacher because of how my parents raised me, and I've been able to help hundreds of kids over the years. I hope that would make her proud." Behind the scenes, Ellen made a decision that would change everything. That's when Maria stood up. The movement caught Ellen's attention first, then Sarah's, then the cameras. An older Latina woman, tears streaming down her face, rising from her seat in the third row. "Sarah," Maria said, her voice barely audible but picked up by the studio microphones. "Sarah, mi niña?" The studio fell completely silent. Ellen's eyes went wide as she looked between Sarah and the woman in the audience. Sarah's face went pale, her hand instinctively reaching for Ellen's arm. "Ma'am," Ellen said gently, "would you like to come down here?" Security started to move, but Ellen waved them off. Something in her gut told her this was important, that this moment was bigger than protocol. Maria walked down the steps slowly, her legs shaking. When she reached the stage area, she stopped a few feet from Sarah's chair. For 45 years, she had imagined this moment, what she would say, how it would feel. Now, facing her daughter, she found herself speechless. Sarah stared at this woman, something stirring deep in her memory. Not a conscious recollection, but something cellular, something that felt like coming home. "I held you for 3 hours," Maria whispered. 3 hours after you were born, you had this little birthmark on your shoulder shaped like a heart. Sarah's hand flew unconsciously to her left shoulder, where beneath her dress, a small heart-shaped birthmark had always been her secret, a mark she'd never mentioned to anyone, not even her adoptive parents. Ellen, understanding the magnitude of what was happening, made another unprecedented decision. She stood up and gently guided both women to the center of the stage. "Sarah," Ellen said softly, "I think we need to stop the show for a minute." But Sarah was already moving. 45 years of questions, of wondering, of carrying a piece of herself that had always felt missing propelled her toward this stranger who somehow felt familiar. When they embraced, the studio erupted in applause, but neither woman heard it. They were in their own world, a world where time had stopped and love had found its way home. "I thought about you every day," Maria cried into Sarah's shoulder. "Every single day. I wondered if you were happy, if you were healthy, if you knew how much I loved you." "I knew," Sarah whispered back. "Somehow, I always knew." Ellen, tears streaming down her own face, addressed the audience. "I think we're witnessing something sacred here, folks. Sometimes television gives us something we didn't know we needed to see." The segment that was supposed to last 8 minutes stretched to 25. Ellen threw out her planned schedule entirely, focusing instead on this mother and daughter who had found each other in the most unexpected place. Maria told Sarah about the letter she'd written but never sent. Sarah shared stories about her childhood, her career, her life, and in the space between them, 45 years of separation began to heal. As the show finally wrapped, Ellen made one more gesture that would define her legacy. She established a scholarship fund in Sarah's name for children aging out of foster care who wanted to become teachers. And she gave both women her personal phone number, not for publicity, but for the simple reason that some moments are too important for business. 6 months later, Sarah moved back to Los Angeles to be closer to Maria. She found a teaching position at an elementary school just 15 minutes from her birth mother's apartment, and every few weeks they returned to Ellen's show, not as guests but as part of the extended family that Ellen had created around acts of love and courage. The episode aired exactly as it happened, with no editing to diminish the raw emotion. It became the highest-rated Ellen episode ever, but more than that, it sparked thousands of adoption reunions. People watching at home reached out to find lost family members, inspired by the simple truth that love, real love, always finds a way. Ellen kept the tissue she'd used to wipe Sarah's tears that day, framed in her office alongside letters from viewers whose lives had been changed by witnessing that moment. Because sometimes the most powerful television happens not when you're trying to entertain, but when you simply allow love to unfold in its own perfect timing. And Sarah Mitchell, the teacher from Kansas who came to Hollywood to be honored for her work with children, discovered that the greatest lesson of all was already written in her heart, that every ending is really just a beginning, and every question mark can become an exclamation point when love finally comes home.